welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, and welcome to another chapter of Turn the Page, the official podcast of Syosset Public Library. I'm Jen, and I am your host for this episode, and I'm here with the author of a really dreamy and beautiful and eerie new novel. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Absolutely. My name is Nghi Vo. I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and this past year through Tor.com, I've released the novel Siren Queen, which is a 1930s novel set in Hollywood that is both magical and run on fairyland rules, and the main character is a queer Chinese American woman, which I think covers all my bases. Those are all the adjectives that go with that book.
It's great. They're such good adjectives. Like they're great to put them all together, you know.
It's hard getting, it's like I'm still trying to figure out the elevator pitch for it, which I'm sure my agent would love it if I'd figured that out when I first pitched it, but you know, that's a lost cause.
It kind of gets harder the farther you get away from it, I find, you know, like, because I wrote a comics a few years ago.
Oh, sure.
And at the time, I had a really concise elevator pitch that was like well rehearsed, and I'd give it at, you know, Comic Cons and all that. And now I'm just like, I don't know, it's kind of about everything. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's probably something in there you're gonna like, so yeah, it'll be fine.
So this is not your first novel, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your writing career and how it led you to this book.
Okay, let's see. When it comes to writing career, I've been doing this for a while. I published my first professional short story in spec fic around about 2004, and after that, I sort of just plunged into sort of the no man's land of ghostwriting and freelance writing. So let's see, you know, I've done everything from vacuum cleaner parts to how to raise cockroaches, which I don't recommend. I did not actually have a cockroach phobia before I wrote that guide, but now I do. And so let's see, around about 2017, I wrote Siren Queen, which was the first novel I ever completed from beginning to end. And I submitted to a contest, it lost out. And so I'm like, maybe there's something to this whole publishing industry where I could make some money. And so I started sending it out to agents. Actually, the first agent I sent it to, Diana Fox, she was my first choice. And of course, you know, she didn't get back to me right away. So I'm like, okay, so that's doing something out there in the world. I suppose I should write something else. And then Tor.com had its novella contest, which was very notable because it was I only had to hit 20,000 words, which is, you know, I'm like, I can probably write 20,000 words at a time. And also because the contest is unagented, and that's where my first novella, The Empress of Salt and Fortune, came from. And so it sort of just kind of snowballed from there for the past 5 years, most of that not in the public eye because publishing takes forever. But it's been going pretty quickly at a pretty fast clip these last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like The Chosen and the Beautiful like just came out, and we already have like another novel in our hands, and it's so exciting.
It's very, very dizzying. I'm like, so this all happened when now? Like last week, right? No.
So one of the things that I loved so much about this book, among many things, is that you really vividly evoke pre-code Hollywood, which is a really interesting time period in which the film industry was kind of like in transition between silent film and talkies. And it was before, you know, the Hays censorship code. So movies were like a little bit looser and like had like a little bit more freedom, you know, to tell stories before that code was imposed. And I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about like what drew you to that time period.
Well, I mean, first of all, it started with, you know, taking like a single film class back in college about 20 years ago. So I watched some pre-code films, and they are so different than what we think of. We think of the 1920s and 30s as being, you know, we tend to think of the times that came before us as more straight-laced or more conservative, and that's simply not the case. It was during this era that we had a gay male romance, basically from beginning to end in a movie. We had movies like Design for Living, which involves a triad, two men and a woman deciding that they're going to avoid marriage and just live together happily, and that's how the movie ends. And so, it's become this really fascinating examination of how an art form can really just spring into being and reflect a great deal of the world, and then how it can be pushed back. And I really wanted to examine what that time period was like before it was pushed back, both how wild it was and how terrifying it could be as well, because early Hollywood's just full of terror. That's not even just me with like the monsters in the water. That really is just history,
Oh my gosh, yes. It really struck me that like it's a very accurate depiction of the period, but it does have these like magical, monstrous elements threaded through, and like even if you were to take all those supernatural elements out, it would still be like a nightmare story just because of the things that people had to go through in order to become famous and be accepted. And it's just like it seems like it took a lot of sacrifice and doing things that you might not necessarily want to do, and it's a really interesting time.
It's a very dark time, and I've run into this review a few times as the book has come out, which is not only did people not know that it was a fantasy, it took them a while to figure out. I'm like, really? I put in a lot. I mean, there's a lot of monsters here. There's a lot of ghosts and dead people. There's a cowgirl. I mean, not like like woman who rides horses, but woman who's partially a cow. I think I put in the work, right?
Oh my gosh, I love her.
Oh, Greta, yeah, Greta. That's she's very much based on my crush on Greta Garbo. Actually, I don't know how obvious that is.
Oh, yes, that makes so much sense now. Absolutely. Oh my gosh. So I'm wondering, like, what shaped your depiction of this Hollywood run by monsters, like because it makes sense on a metaphorical level for sure. And then like the literal level is just like kind of another added layer.
Okay, to be perfectly honest, this story came about because of a late night conversation I had with my friend Grace. Grace is the person who the book is actually dedicated to, because apparently in the middle of trying to figure out what we were going to do for dinner a couple days later, I started saying, "Hey Grace, have you ever noticed that basically pre-code Hollywood is a lot like fairyland, where they can take your real name and give you another one, and there are changelings and deals you can't win and forces that are so huge and dark that you can't even understand them?" And she didn't say, "Nee, I would really like to know where we're going for food." And instead, she just sort of encouraged me for like the next 2 hours. And that was part of it. It was the deals. It was the names. The names especially came up with it, which is, how, there was a publicity machine, manufacturing you a whole name and an identity. And there was the fictionalization of it, which I thought was fascinating, because movie stars used to have whole histories made up for them to suit the movies they did. Like if an actress was doing like if she was playing a princess, there would be all these pieces released about how she was really Hungarian royalty escaped from the distant east, and then there would be like no contradiction when the next movie came out and she was a cute little girl from the farm, and of course she came from Minnesota or Wisconsin. And it was just a fiction we all bought into, but it was also fact. And that was, that sort of all intersects with fairyland and all the myths from Europe for me.
Absolutely. Like there is something really to be said about the fact that, not only do these actors have to pretend to be somebody else in a movie, as an actor, but then had to sort of create these entirely new identities just to market themselves or to, like there is something about the Hollywood machine that like makes identities really, I don't know, fragile or
Really fragile and very vulnerable, I think,
Yeah.
is one of the words that came up, because there's a sequence that I got to write, which I was very pleased I got to write, about faces and faces being changed or grafted on. And it really is just a vague exaggeration of what actually happened. Like, actresses who had their ethnicities hidden or emphasized or de-emphasized in one way, shape, or form, up to and including through plastic surgery, that they did not necessarily that they would not have willingly signed on for without the pressure of the entire thing that is giving them their living pushing it. And there was a lot hidden, and that's part of it. It's transformation, and there's nothing, I mean, one of the most horrifying things in the world is transformation against your will. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there is this sort of really interesting tension between, these characters doing things that they want to in order to achieve the goals that they have, but also being constrained into some choices, like it's a very difficult line to walk.
right, and there's just the fun of actors picking up roles and then their lives being roles. And the more biographies I read about old school Hollywood, the more I'm like, it's like that meme. It's like, you live like this. It's a nightmare.
Yeah, it really is. And I find it very interesting, that when you read old Hollywood memoirs, all the ones that claim to be authorized by the subject, like those are usually the least true ones,
And sometimes you have to go to like the people who knew them, like the best anecdotes about. I feel like the best anecdotes about Mae West came from biographies of Marlene Dietrich. It's you're just sort of like trying to figure out where you are in that web and what people are saying about each other, and just evaluate some kind of truthfulness, if you can get any kind of truthfulness from something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I find it really interesting that your book really captures like the harsh reality of Hollywood at the time, while also painting it as like, a dreamy, magical setting that one still can't really help but to want to be a part of, and that's
right. And I feel like that just carries forward. It's like, even now we look at Hollywood, it's like, well, that looks like a nightmare. It's like, but I want to be a part of that. I'm like, really?
yeah. It reminded me of like, when I was 10 reading Jurassic Park, and when it
Oh
was
yeah.
done, I was like, I learned nothing. I would still go to the dinosaur park and I would probably
We would
die
all
there.
go to the dinosaur park.
Yeah. And like same thing here. It's like, wow, this is terrible. I would still love to be an actor. That sounds like a cool way to live,
Sounds so cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, so I'm really curious about like what your approach to world building was in this book, because a lot of the sort of magical elements, speak to things that the characters are going through or are, linked in order to things in things that they're experiencing. And I'm wondering, like, did you let the characters and the stories dictate the kind of magic that appeared, or did you like craft the magical world and then situate characters in it, if that makes any sense?
No, it actually does. And it's something that I've thought about a lot, both before I wrote the book and also in retrospect, as as I move forward and have to explain to myself to way more people than just my agent and my editor, right? So the magic from both Siren Queen and its predecessor, The Chosen and the Beautiful, come from two places. One of them is just fairyland and fairy tales. We don't really question fairy tales, especially not when we're young. There is magic, and of course, the youngest is going to be the hero. Of course, the evil wizard can make a forest grow out of a comb, and there's no explanation for that. And given the fact that I started out reading lots of fairy tales, especially when I was very, very small, that made an impression. The other big factor that came into that was actually being part of, I realized this pretty quickly as I was writing, is being part of the diaspora, where you at home you have the rules for one world, and then you walk into the world and your parents can't necessarily explain it to you, and every day you're trying to play catch up with what the rules around you are, and you really can't be surprised every time something shocking happens. Like, I remember the first, like, for some reason, what really broke my head one time was trying candied yams. Like, just completely destroyed me as an 8-year-old, because I'm like, this is a root vegetable. Why is it sweet? And there are plenty of reasons it can be sweet, but I was just completely unprepared for that. And it's not worth it every time to lose your mind over what new wonder or monstrosity the world is pushing at you. You just have to kind of roll through it. And that's what a lot of my characters do. And I feel like at this point, that's what a lot of my books are doing, which is like, you're just gonna have to roll with it. There's gonna be another punch coming in just a minute. So I suggest you brace rather than flip out.
And that totally makes sense, I think, for both books, because like in both worlds you have like settings where there are like pretty strict not really like behavioral codes, I would say, but like pretty strict senses of like how people should relate to each other, and like business etiquette, and like maintaining appearances. And so especially in like the highly the strongly hierarch what's the adjective for that, like they're in hierarchical
Hierarchical.
words. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. And so like that maintaining appearances and pretending that nothing phases you is like actually really important, and it can create like tension and drama, but also like humor, and it just like creates a lot of interesting opportunities, I think.
It was definitely a fun thing to leave her open. I'm going to be I'll probably be examining it pretty closely in the next book that I'll be writing next year. So I'm very excited for that.
That's great. I love to hear that. So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the Hollywood machine in this book. I was really taken by the descriptions of like these sort of like night rituals that occur in this. Like you have the things like the bonfires that the stars all gather around to worship old stars and to like push their name forward as new stars, and like the night hunt, and all these like really dangerous but like slightly alluring things are going on. um how did you intend for these things to speak to like what the experience was for like a new starlet coming up in Hollywood, or
There's definitely some of that. Honestly, though, the best antecedent I can give you for the Friday night fires, which are these, after the week, basically the studios sort of devolve into these dark planes with fires, which are ruled over by the kings and queens of Hollywood, both the directors and the stars. And the best place I can give you for where those came from me internally, was rap parties. Like so I did some drama back when I was in high school, early college. I was never an actor, but I liked running stage crew. I liked doing promotion, things like that. And there is nothing quite as exhilarating and terrifying, especially if you grew up as a fairly sheltered child, about a rap party. These are all people who are fresh off of creating roles, and suddenly they get to be themselves again, and that's terrifying and weird. And time that you kiss a girl, the first time you or the first time you have alcohol or try weed, and you're out from home and it is wild and it is completely uncontrolled and you're in over your depth, but they can't pull you away with a chain,
Mhm.
and it's that darkness, and it's that moment of transition for, like, a high school actor or stage crew member. It's a part of growing up. It's a part of discovering who you are away from safety, and that's a big deal, especially for kids, but even for adults. There are these moments of transition, and that's what the fires are. It is the moment where you can be someone else, and that is terrifying, and it is wonderful, and we need it, and we hate it, and we're afraid of it, and it's all fantastic.
Oh, absolutely. That is so interesting. Yeah, and just to, they because these moments, like they are like moments of release too, because like with a rap party, everybody's been rehearsing and performing and expending all this energy and like keeping it together. And then all of a sudden, like everybody gets to party, and that's like feels like what's happening here too. Like it's a little bit of a release valve, but also it's like it's another way for people to cement their power too.
It's like the first time you really meet someone. Like, it's like you can spend like weeks on a production with someone, and then you really don't meet them until, like, some pressure valve's been released, and you see that they're a really cool person or a really terrible person, and it's great. It's weird, but it's great.
Is, yeah. Um, oh, and I was really taken too by the like there is some literal sacrifice going on here too, and that to me like really spoke in a very like moving way to in the way that even today, like the Hollywood machine like can eat up people, and like it's really glamorous and really appealing, but also like it's dangerous and like yeah, like it hollows you out, and that's like a big thing in the book too. I know, like it all just like was really powerful.
I mean, in some ways, it's not even just Hollywood, or it's the thing that Hollywood is the metaphor for, where every choice in life, every important decision, or every important thing we have, it involves the sacrifice of something else. And anyone who tells you you can have something without sacrifice is selling you something. They're lying to you, right? And I mean, for people who work in creative fields, for people who do passion work, or are the guardians of human rights, there is a sacrifice involved. There is a place where you have to give something up to do this thing that you very, very much believe in. And I just make it more explicit. What are you going to give up for a happy life? What are you going to give up to be immortal? From the beginning, it's there's a moment, I don't think it's a huge spoiler because it's pretty early on, where the main character gives up a chunk of her own life. Like, and it's fine. It's at the end. You won't miss it. And I'm like, yeah, you will. You are going to miss that.
Yeah.
and of course it is. And that's, I mean, how many years of your life do you spend writing a book? How many years of your life do you spend writing a play or pursuing an acting career? And one tries to enjoy the journey. And it's very important that one does, because if you can't enjoy the journey, you're screwed. But it's sacrifice. It's feeding something into a machine and hoping you get something wonderful back. And the thing is, it's terrible, but every now and then you do. Every now and then it pays off.
Yeah, absolutely. And like those moments where it does pay off seem like extra powerful and cathartic and amazing, because that happens for like 1 in 5,000 people, like, and everybody else just kind of gets like chewed up by by the process. Yeah. So I was really particularly also taken by, the way that the pre-code period is like pretty important to this, because something that I was thinking as I was reading it, like with the night hunts and the fires, like this world is almost like it is the worst nightmare that was being imagined by the people pushing the Hays Code in a way. Like,
yes.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me that, like, Hollywood was on the brink of just experiencing these major constraints in storytelling and what you could and couldn't show. But that urge to do that, to constrain or censor Hollywood, was also driven by this like concern about like what the stars were getting up to in their private lives. They're like, oh, like if everybody thinks Hollywood is just full of like hedonistic maniacs, and like,
what is it going to do to our children?
Yes. Yeah. Oh,
right.
It's almost like the panic about the children, like,
yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's not really about the children. It's never been about the children. It is about fear. And it is about fear that people might step out of the structure of power, the structure that has given so many people at the top power and has taken away from so many people at the bottom. I'm not a Hollywood scholar. I'm not a historian. I decided very early in my career I'd be a very, very, very bad historian. But it's hard not to look at the Hays Code and see a bunch of very frightened people in power who are looking at the writing on the wall. What is it like if people could love how they wished? What would it be like if looking down the barrel of desegregation, for example? There was a huge hue and cry in the Hays Code over interracial relationships, for example. It wasn't just violence and drugs. So they could see a new world coming, and they were doing everything they could to stop it. And that's what it is at the bottom, and it's what it is at the top, even if the people at the bottom were saying, oh, I see what they mean. And the answer is that's what they would like you to think. That's propaganda. And for me, part of writing in the pre-code world was trying to reflect a world that was a great deal like ours. Like, people loved the same way, people hated the same way, they were angry about the same things, they were bored by the same things. There was no, I hate it whenever anyone says, the good old days. I'm like, find me one. Find me a single good old day. I dare you. Mm-hmm. But the part of it is, just like there were no good old days, there was never a time when people weren't people. And the things that we want today are very much similar to the things that people wanted in the past, if not identical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, totally. Like, and something that like really got me thinking about this is that like it is a sort of like intergenerational fear, that like if the children aren't invoked at all, it's because like these children might not grow up the way that I did, like,
right. And wouldn't it be wonderful if children didn't grow up the way we did? Wouldn't that be amazing?
Oh gosh, it would be great. Yeah. And like this idea that, because I actually I did study history a little bit, and like a lot of people assume, like, when you look at history with a long view, that like things just sort of inevitably and unidirectionally just get better over time. And that's like a really dangerous idea too. And I think, without getting too into it, like we're living through a period right now where we see that like things don't always get better over time, and
no, we have to make them better. That's the deal. That is what we were given. It's what we have to pay forward.
Yeah. And Luli, our main character, is like very aware of this, and she wants to be a part of this machine, but also she doesn't want to lose herself in it, you know? So she does stick up for herself a lot, and she draws firm boundaries, even like as she is making these huge sacrifices. She kind of like refuses to make certain changes or to accommodate the machine in certain ways, you know?
And at the same time, she still has to, because she wants to be a part of this. She wants to be part of this terrible system that chews up people who are just like her. And that was such a fun balance to strike when writing Luli, because she will sacrifice some things, she will not sacrifice others, and that's all of us. You know, we, especially when we're younger, I think we have this idea that we want to be heroes, or that there are villains that we can defeat, and there's no such animal on either side. There's just people doing what they need to do, or what they think they need to do to be fed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in a recent interview, this was fun. They're like, it'd be fascinating to see a sequel where, you know, Luli actually takes a sort of a mentoring role and protects people. And I'm like, I am so sorry if I gave you the wrong idea about Luli. I'm just imagining, like, you know, the whole hero getting the call, and I imagine like this knocking on Luli's door, and the first thing she says, "Who are you? And get the fuck off my property."
Yep. Yeah.
Get out.
Yeah, she would not be into that.
And that's the thing that being a survivor really does. It's something that it does to you. It makes you very protective of the progress you've made. And the important thing is to defend against it making you cruel, or just another part of the system that nearly killed you. And sometimes you win that balance, and sometimes you don't.
Yeah, absolutely. I was curious, like, did you draw any inspiration from the story of, or the life of, Anna May Wong when you were crafting Luli? Or
Absolutely. It's not a direct correspondence. Anna May Wong actually crosses over best with Su Tong Lin, who is an Asian actress that came before Luli in the book. And that was actually something that I kind of wanted to play up, which is there's this big temptation, especially in diaspora narratives, especially in, you know, chosen one narratives, which I'm not a huge fan of, but where you're the only one. And the thing is, you never are, even if there's only a few. And that's one of the things that Luli runs into when she finally does intersect with the chop suey circuit in San Francisco. You're never the only one. You're never by yourself. There were actually a handful of Asian American actors in our version in actual Hollywood. It's just different, you know. And the excuse I gave for why Luli never ran into any of them is that there's also 2 other studios, and they just weren't there. And there was a lot of while studios would loan each other actors, there wasn't a huge amount of even social crossover, or at least that's how I excused it. And so yes, I read a lot about Anna May Wong. I also read a lot about Sesue Hayakawa, I believe. I think I might have butchered his name, but he was a Japanese American actor from about the same time period. And there was also all the fun research I got to do into the Forbidden Palace and the chop suey circuit, which is an Asian American entertainment circuit that was active during the 30s and 40s.
Ooh, that is very interesting.
No, there's a documentary. It's fantastic. There are actual video interviews with the actors, dancers, singers who were, you know, they were promoting themselves as the Asian Ronald Wright. And you know, part of it was the strangeness for a lot of white audiences of seeing an Asian person be able to speak and sing perfect English. And on one hand, it's a bit bitter being that kind of novelty act, but on the other hand, you know, as a lot of creatives say, well, you know, it's a job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, and Luli does walk a very interesting line throughout this. You know, and it's something that Anna May Wong did too. I think that they have tried to stay away from these stereotypical roles that would normally be where Asian women were sort of like slotted into. But Luli in particular does a really good job of like refusing those roles, but while also, I don't know, embracing some roles that you know do portray her as sort of like monstrous, right? And she kind of embraces that in a really fun, interesting way.
Oh yeah, that's half the fun of it, because here's the thing. I had an idea of where Siren Queen was going when I picked it up. I knew that Luli would end up being, I mean, the funny thing was the title showed up like within that first night of me plotting with Grace about what this book was going to be. So I knew where it was going to end. I knew who she was going to end it with. What I didn't know was how she was going to get there. And that's a really fun, weird, scary place to be writing, especially through Act 1, because I'm like, well, this is a lot of nice, fun things you're doing. How do we get to where we're going, you know? And then she said, and Tor.com, I love them for using this as the tagline. It's like, no maids, no funny talking, no fainting flowers. And literally what's left? What is left for Lily? She gets a few bit parts, and then they're like, okay, we're gonna smack a latex tail on you and make you a monster. And she's like, okay, I'm in. I'm good with that. That in fact hits every rule that I made, and we're gonna just lean into it. And you know, if you are not what the world considers normal, you have had to reckon with the idea of monstrousness in some way. You know, if you're queer, if you're not white, if you're not cis, if you're not thin, if you're not abled, you have to reckon with the fact that there's a portion of the world that considers you distasteful and monstrous. And what you do with that label, you can spend your whole life pushing it away, which is legitimate, because who wants to be a monster? And then you meet me and a lot of my friends where it's like, no, monster sounds good, because I would rather be a monster than I'd rather be a monster than you know.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, and it's really fun to watch her sort of like, I don't want to call it like a journey of self-acceptance, but she is just sort of like is over the course of the book like embracing this role and like embracing the fame that it brings her, but also the sense of power, because she gets to like, you know, threaten men and like and just do a bunch of cool stuff like as the siren. So
no one gets to do what she does, and that's something that is a thrill. That is, and no one can do it as well as she does because of who she is. And you know, and we want to be known by our work, but sometimes we also want to be known for exactly what we are.
Definitely. So something that you have started to talk about a little bit, I'd like to like open up a little bit more. There are a lot of queer identities here in the book. There's Luli, and is her name Emmeline or Emmeline?
Emmeline is how I pronounce it,
Emmeline.
but you know, yeah.
Her screen partner, and then there's the, you know, the screen partner who is like a gay man who is in like, you know, sort of in the process of arranging like a studio mandated marriage, you know. And this is also like realistic to the period too, because like there is this like real tension between, you know, this sort of like liberal tolerance of individuals in Hollywood who were like, yeah, like don't ask, don't tell, like just, you know, rolling with it. But then they're also operating like under the constant threat of exposure that like, you know, your secret life could be revealed and it could be leveraged to, you know, destroy your reputation if you step out of line, you know. And so like how do you see these like how are these tensions at work in these characters' lives, you know, like because they are exploring who they are and exploring new relationships, but also really have to be afraid of like what the machine can do to them, you know?
The word that I kept in mind when I was writing a lot of this was actually the word marginalized. You know, these are people who are living their lives on the edges of what so-called proper society would allow. And they're being allowed to. But there's also the fact that they are all very aware, some of them more than others, some of them significantly less. You know, Lily gets called out a few times as being very reckless. But there's a tolerance that is being extended there. And that's humiliating. It is humiliating to have your life and your existence be on sufferance, basically. And that is something that a lot of them are very aware. It's a hammer that's ready to come down. And that's why you know, we can't accept lives that are lived in the margin, or lives that are lived on, that are being tolerated or suffered. We must live lives that are being protected and celebrated. And that's part of it. And part of creating each of the characters was something I really wanted to try to really explicate, was the idea that if you were being threatened, there's no wrong way to survive. There are things you shouldn't do. There are people that you shouldn't hurt. But there's no wrong way to try to get ahead if you can, especially if you're under attack. And there are some survival techniques that are more palatable than others. You know, there are some that are, you know, that will be considered cowardice in 5 years or 10 years. And there are some that will be seen as, no, that's really just what had to happen. And every character takes a different approach. You know, there's Tara, who basically hides but not really in plain sight. There's Lily, who uses the shield of her own monstrousness to keep people away. There's Emmeline, who gets by trying to be, you know, the sweet the sweet country girl that everyone knows, except really you don't. And and there's Harry, of course, who is the Screen King of legend, and none of it will protect you, none of it. And you have to figure out what you're going to do when push comes to shove, and that was part of one of the great pleasures of writing this book, and also one of the things where I'm like, if I get this wrong, I'm going to hate myself for the rest of my life.
Well, I think you got it really right. And I think it's, it's really interesting to watch these characters walk that path, to sort of like explore who they are, but also, have to operate under these conditions and to sort of, I don't know, it was very interesting, and it created a lot of like really interesting relationships and character dynamics. So.
Yeah, if you've ever like volunteered at like a nonprofit, you know that it's like everyone is trying to do good, and we are going to bitch and complain and fight with each other all the way down that road.
Yep. 100%. So do you see anything in the future for these characters? Do you think you'll ever return to them, or was this like a one-off?
Oh, well, fingers crossed. I have under contract. Well, I'm not sure if it's under contract. I should find that out. Tor.com seems to like it when I do novellas, and I really like doing novellas because novels are like endurance marches. And for me, a novella is like, I'm like 20,000 words. I can do that in a month, and then I'm free. It's fine. I'm done. So I would actually really love it if I theoretically get to write some follow-up novellas. There's one that is hopefully coming out from Tor.com for Chosen in 2025, actually.
Nice.
But I would really, really love to write. There's a novella in my head that's been there for a bit about Su Tonglin and the fact that she was discovered out of vaudeville. And I know that there's a very fun story about Luli actually touring during World War World War II with the USO shows, and how that goes for her, which is to say badly, but she does end up in France. So, I'd love to send Luli to France and have her go, okay, here we are.
I would love to see what she does in France. That sounds absolutely fascinating.
It'd be so much fun. Like, I've read so much about Marlene Dietrich and other stars touring with the USO during World War II, and how strange and weird that was to be in a war zone. And that's a A-list movie star right over there.
Yeah, that was a weird period for sure.
Very weird.
And yeah, I would love to see like how they do in that milieu. So I'll be on the lookout for that. Well, I wanted to thank you so much for coming to talk with us today. I really, really loved this book, and I'm really grateful that you made the time to speak with me about it.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been fun.
You're welcome. So listeners, you can pick up Siren Queen at your nearest library or independent bookstore, and I highly recommend that you do. This has been Jen in conversation with Nghi Vo, and it is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.